A bold dumbass crushes a shy genius.
That's Arjun Mahadevan. He's helped over 10,000 startups and e-commerce businesses get started through his own $100 million startup, Doola.
I think that balance is for people who haven't yet found their purpose.
Along the way, he got into Y Combinator.
I thought, hey, I'd rather have 93% of something than 100% of nothing.
And built an audience of over 80,000 people across LinkedIn and X as Mr. LLC.
People don't buy from businesses, they buy from people.
He told me how he raised $1 million in 2 minutes, how he persevered after his first startup failed, and what he did and didn't learn about being a founder from working at Dropbox. This is Arjun Mahadevan's founding journey. Arjun, great to have you on, man. Good to see you. Welcome to the pod.
Let's do it. Thanks for having me on.
100%. Let's do it. Okay, so let's dive right in. So you got $1 million from a pitch competition early on for Doola from HubSpot, I think, right? How do you nail a 2-minute pitch to a big company that probably had a lot of people in this pitch competition and own something like that? How do you get the pitch perfect?
I kid you not, I just recorded a video earlier today. I swear to God, 10-minute video, and the title of the video is How to Raise $1 million in 2 minutes. And that's what we did here. So I'll give you the exact playbook here. This is what we did. Step 1 was the preparation, where HubSpot said, hey, there's an opportunity to come be in this $1 million pitch contest. Candidly, I thought it was like Shark Tank, where 99.9% of people go on and don't make money, but they said they could come to the conference for free. And I thought, even if there's just 100 people in the crowd, that's 100 people I can share the story to. So asymmetric upside there seemed like a good fit because time is valuable as a founder. The second thing is, this might sound incredibly wooey or woo-saw, whatever you want to call it, but I actually visualized before that I would win. So I went on stage the night before and I practiced my presentation, kind of looked out, imagining what it was like. And the second thing, the judges said, if you win, you need to have a thank you speech prepared. I wrote the thank you speech. So in my head already, I think I was already envisioning, hey, I'm going to nail this pitch and do it. And yeah, hindsight's 20/20, but I think that does matter. The second thing I did was also, I've seen these pitch competitions before. Usually there's way too much information on slides. So my acronym was KISS, keep it simple, stupid. 1 message per slide, 1 huge image, and a story that made sense. And then the third thing, this is the biggest thing, 2-minute pitch. People aren't going to remember what you say. There's this study from Albert Mehrabian. He's a UCLA psychologist professor, and he did research on human communication. He found that in human communication, 55% is body language. The way you stand, the way you project yourself, your gait. 38% is tone of voice, so the way you say things, and then only 7% is what you say. So for those doing the math, 93% of human communication is your body language and tone and inflection. Only 7% is the word. So in the pitch, I knew the war is won before the battle begins. If I just come on stage with presence and I say the first sentence well, you're going to win, and if you finish that way too. Now, obviously, I think you have to tell a cohesive story, but people don't remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel. And I think during that pitch, I did a good job of that. So there you go. That's the video in 2 minutes instead of 10 minutes.
Want to get more insights like that? Each week, I actually interview multiple founders. For the ones who don't join the podcast, I write up a case study and share it with all founding journey members. I also write weekly tactical deep dives, share startup opportunities, and analyze trends that I'm noticing. We've also got a community of founders, an investor and pitch deck database, and more fun stuff like over $60,000 in perks and discounts to help you build, grow, and raise capital for your startup. Go to join.foundingjourney.com to get access.
I love it. Appreciate the TLDR version there. I think a lot of that resonates. Do you think that those skills, obviously specifically you use that for the pitch competition, do you think those skills are applicable to founders in other areas? And are those things they should be spending time sort of early in their journey training themselves on?
Not just founders, anywhere in life. You're interviewing for a job. You're going on a date. You're doing a sales call. In anything, you are presenting yourself. So for example, on calls, when I do calls with people, I think of these same things of, hey, the way I'm on a call, I don't sit down on calls anymore. I stand up because I have more energy automatically there. So I know my inflection is going to be higher. Coming in strong with just introducing myself instead of whispering. So absolutely, I think it applies to everything. You're selling candidates, you're selling the team internally, you're talking to customers. All of those things before I've even said a word can rub off in a positive way.
Makes a lot of sense. I think you also do a really good job of, you've built a presence, you've built a founder brand on social media as well. You sort of put yourself out there in that way and sort of taken that mindset, applied it to content. I think that's something that, obviously a lot of founders should be doing. at least with some of their time. What's the secret there? How do you translate that mindset to written content or to video content like you do as well?
Ultimately, I think that people don't buy from businesses, they buy from people. And this thing I've been thinking about a lot is that facts tell, but stories sell. Where you can figure out the know-hows and see what the double clicks are, but ultimately, do you want to be a part of that brand or that story? So I actually think that it's a competitive advantage to be the one telling the story. And ultimately, in this day and age, when we haven't even gotten into AI, but I think it's going to get easier and easier to create the product, which is fantastic. More innovation, competition's good, lowers cost, increases the bar for quality of product. But that means it's even more important, those things which you might have called fluff in the past, the brand or the user experience, those things matter even more. The story, the tribe or the cult you want to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, I wish I started the second I started Doola. Even before, I actually wish I'd been more consistent about posting online and building the presence, but better late than never. And ultimately, I do think that in the future, that will be one of the true differentiators, is there'll be a lot of commoditized offerings and products, but your brand and your story, that you can differentiate on, and I think that's critical.
I think for the business you guys have built, that's also good news, right? Because if AI is making it easier to build products, that means that we're probably going to have more people comfortable kind of taking that jump into entrepreneurship, starting companies, needing to help with incorporation and all the other things that you guys do to help founders. So how are you guys thinking about AI from a strategic perspective within sort of this broader economic shift?
You are totally right. I think that a lot of people talk about the 0 to 1 journey, which is typically defined as product market fit. There's metrics of hitting 1 million in ARR or customers grabbing you by the shirt sleeve saying, I need this thing. I actually think it has to start at -1 to 0, which is a really critical phase of mentally preparing yourself for the journey, having the right idea, and then taking the step. So I think things like AI, things like stories or tribes or communities, which can help you realize, hey, there's people around me that are also doing this, that can help you go -1 to 0. And I also do think we exist to make it easier to overcome this mental friction of, I'm not a CPA, I don't know bookkeeping, I don't know how to form a company, so I'm not cut out for it. The truth is, no one knew those things. You don't have to know those things. We want to be that Staples easy button so that someone selling on Shopify or Amazon can say, I can do this because Doola is going to handle my entire back office, the formation, the sales tax, the bookkeeping, the taxes, the analytics. So I can focus on whether you're selling t-shirts or trying to build the next Shopify, finding product market fit. And then once you find product market fit, the goal is to scale. No one ever just stops right there too.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you mentioned Shopify, obviously you mentioned Amazon. I know you guys have been sort of niching down onto e-commerce after initially starting with a broader target. Curious your thought process there. I think a lot of founders sort of go through that sort of this like, not necessarily a pivot, but like a sharpening of their focus. How did you guys decide that was the right move and what's that been like?
One thing which can be helpful in any situation is sometimes there's a very specific point solution which you've identified, but I do think part of your strategy can be to go broad, to go niche, where you are going broad and intentionally saying, hey, let me talk to many different types of people. And then you figure out where you think the well is deepest or where the most oil is. I like that analogy of, hey, when you're starting a business, you're looking for oil. And the truth is there's oil all over the world. There's oil today, there'll be oil tomorrow. But where's the most oil? Where is it worth digging? And I think in our case, we saw there's oil on over 175 countries, 6 different continents, e-commerce businesses, consulting businesses, venture-backed startups supplying to ICs. There's lots of oil out there. But our belief is there's a lot of people not looking for oil in e-commerce, and there's a huge underserved market there too, meaning we can go from digging for oil to now building the oil rigs to extract as much oil as possible and serve as much of these founders. So I do think ultimately you can serve many people mediocrely or a select few spectacularly. And that's what we want to do is, if you want to boil the ocean, start by boiling the spoon. Let's build a fantastic experience for these e-commerce businesses. And from there, you can always take the business in a box and potentially serve other industries too.
And I guess why did e-commerce stand out? Like what made that the attractive opportunity within that ocean?
Without even marketing to e-commerce businesses were coming to us. It was quickly 1/4 then 1/3 of the customer base with a general solution. But that was loud and clear to us of, hey, someone hasn't really bundled these things together and served the problem in a way that exists yet. So now we can sharpen the pencil or add to the box where you need to start an LLC for your e-commerce business. You have physical nexus. You need to register for sales tax. Cool. Doola can do that. Are you a drop shipper? You then want to pay double taxes. Cool. Let's get a reseller certificate so you don't pay on purchase. Instead, you're just charging the customer. Your store is now running. Are you running profitably? What's your ROAS? Can you track your inventory? e-commerce analytics. So it becomes a lot easier to actually add value to that specific segment over time.
Yeah, I think the analytics part in particular sounds pretty valuable. I think especially within e-commerce, but also just in general for early stage companies trying to get their footing and grow. It sounds too easy to get that data, but you just don't have time. And so it's actually not that easy to get it structured in a way that makes sense to take action on it for your business. So yeah, is that what you guys have seen?
Absolutely. Everyone talks about how data is so important, but you don't always check it. But I think part of it's one of my favorite books is Atomic Habits by James Clear. The easiest thing to start a new habit is to make it obvious. So how can it be obvious? For us, it's integrated. It's right where you're checking your bookkeeping or your taxes. The second thing, I think about this a lot now, is one of Google's philosophies has been only build things that people would use daily. So a calendar or Gmail or a map solution. The thing I like about analytics is I check my analytics dashboard every single day. I have an 8-sleep bed. It texts me my sleep metrics every single day. And I look at that. I actually want to build an analytics tool where you're waking up and before you check your text, you're looking at your analytics dashboard through Doola because the metrics matter when you're scaling. And I see that potential. The goal is make it easy, make it obvious, and make it insightful too.
It's one of those things everyone knows they should be doing it and they should be sort of basing their decisions, at least to some degree, on the data, right? Obviously, there's some things that you're not going to always be able to capture, but using that to drive your decisions. But because of how chaotic early stage startups are when you're starting a new business, it's a lot easier to say and to think than to actually say, all right, let me bring that to the forefront of my mind.
100%. It's one of these, I put it in the bucket of these unteachable truths where you have to go through it the hard way to actually learn it. These things like niching down, or these things like hire slow, fire fast. People often do it backwards where they hire quickly, fire slow. There's so many of these unteachable truths everyone talks about, but you have to make the mistake to learn it.
That's a good one. I think we've all sort of gone through that where we bring somebody in because a problem it feels like it's on fire and you got to solve it. Bring a body in to solve it, and then you end up giving that person a lot more rope. Well, what other advice like that would you give to maybe a first time founder who's just starting out their company?
For someone just starting, I'm talking idea stage, something in their head. My biggest piece of advice is ignore the crabs. And the way I describe this is if you have a bucket of crabs, and this is real, and one crab starts to climb out of the bucket, you know what the other crabs do? They'll actually pull the crab down, and sometimes they'll even break its leg. So that sounds morbid, but the truth is that bucket of crabs resembles society, where if someone takes action, oftentimes people say, hey, like, why are you doing that? You should be careful. You shouldn't do that, or that's too risky. When you were talking about it before, everyone was supportive. So what ends up happening is that when someone takes action, it's threatening to you who's not taking action. And you're actually just becoming it's threatening your insecurity of, hey, why are they doing the thing and I'm not? So I think the damaging thing is it's so hard to start. Your idea is so fragile. Every idea started. Can you imagine there were crabs when Airbnb started and people said, should I sleep in someone's room? There were tons of crabs. Or I think the story of Pinterest, he was doing it for years and no one believed him. And he was just ashamed. Like, I got to make this work because I don't want to go back to Google and have people make fun of me. But
right.
It's so fragile. And realistically, there's just crabs who are saying it's a stupid idea or it's a bad idea. So I think you have to ignore the crabs. And what I think is, how do you find your 5 chimps? You're the average of the 5 people around you. Find other people in a community who are doing a similar thing who won't be as detracting to you. So that's truly like the -1 to 0 stage for someone just starting. And I think for someone who's maybe in the build phase, I think the biggest thing, which is, again, an unteachable truth, but it's so true, is I think YC says it so well. It's like, talk to users and build product. And no solution to your business is impossible to find. Talking to more users will actually solve it. Any problem you have in your business will just be solved by talking to more users. So that's one thing I realized is, doesn't matter what stage you're in, don't fall too far apart. It's not like, oh, just going 0 to 1, you do 200 calls and you're done. You have to keep doing them. So that's the other thing I would say is, literally, if you think of any problem you're facing in your business, anything, if you just talk to more customers, you're actually going to figure out a solution.
That's so true. And people often forget it. They often try to over-intellectualize it. But okay, I never heard the crabs thing before. I like that a lot. No crabs, yes chimps. That's the vibe.
There we go. Bad crabs, good chips.
Love it. Let's talk about YC a little bit. So you did YC. You also did OnDeck, I believe. Very different programs, different stages of the company journey in a lot of cases. How do you think, like, should founders be taking part in these sort of cohort-based programs if they get the opportunity to do so? What are the different sort of value you got from each one?
Before I answer this, my question is, have you ever met a lawyer who's regretted going to law school, or someone who's done an MBA and regretted going? My more meta point here is, everyone who does the thing finds some way to rationalize it. So my answer is, before I even answer, I'm going to find some way to rationalize OnDeck and YC because I did them and I got value. Now, trying to be objective, zooming out, here's what I would say. OnDeck to me was when I was in that -1 to 0 phase. I had the itch, couldn't unscratch it. I wanted to start a business. I left my job at Dropbox. I had a year in savings saved up. I was in Oakland at the time. And the first thing I worked on when I was in OnDeck was a social fitness app, which completely flopped. It was what Paul Graham calls a sitcom idea, which is everyone has a pet, people use Facebook, let's build Facebook for pets. Well, that's good on a sitcom, but it's not solving a real problem. That was kind of the social fitness app I made, which was Instagram combined with ClassPass for working out with friends. ClassPass exists, Instagram exists, and you can text your friends. Sitcom idea, but not a real business. So OnDeck, I think, it's not a prerequisite to starting a business, but for me, I wouldn't be here without it because I was in that phase trying ideas with other people. And that first thing led to the next thing, which led to the next thing, which led to doola. So in hindsight, I can connect the dots, but to be real, you don't need OnDeck to get to that point where you're trying things. Same with YC. The way I view it is we're here today. And I do think in many things in life, success is binary. You either reach the next level or you don't. So with YC, I thought, hey, yeah, they're taking 7% of the company and a lot of people get caught up on that, but I'd rather have 93% of something than 100% of nothing. And YC has worked with thousands of founders. The YC brand is real. Whether you like it or not, that status symbol, the brand matters. And they can help me look around corners that I didn't even know existed. Sign me up. So that was my philosophy there. And ultimately, I think that as the pie gets bigger, I'm okay having a tinier slice if someone can help me along the way.
Interesting. So, okay, am I hearing this right, that you think that these programs can be obviously very valuable and you can find a lot of different types of value within them maybe, but you wouldn't necessarily say every founder should go and apply to YC or OnDeck or something like that?
Correct. I don't think you need to. Like, I think I'm trying to be as objective where I wouldn't say you have to, but I do think that there's tons of value in those programs. But I wouldn't want someone to think like, oh, if I don't get into YC, I can't start a business. The first thing we got into YC with, shut the company down, is a video messaging app. So YC was actually wrong, right? Oh, if only it was as easy as, hey, this accelerator, this community will guarantee success. Can it be predictive? Sure. Like YC has a good track record, but it doesn't determine or guarantee success. There's no formula there. And ultimately, taking action is the biggest thing, right? If you don't take action, you just sit there and something I tell myself is a bold dumbass crushes a shy genius. You could be a genius. You could have all the information in the world, but the person who's too dumb to think what other people think is the one taking action. And I think in so many parts of life, I've seen that now.
I think they're also the one who leads with curiosity more than
Yes.
anything, because they sort of are aware that they don't know everything,
100%. That's well said.
So, okay, so makes sense. So they don't necessarily need OnDeck or YC, but there's value there. But the only thing they need for sure is doola, right? To start the company.
Even then, look, like we tell people, you don't need to use doola to start a business, but here's our value prop. Time is so valuable. And if you could pay someone $3,000 to start your business, help you get your bank account, do your monthly bookkeeping with cash flow, P&L, balance sheet, business taxes done for you with free tax consultations, and your analytics as well, not only is that saving you money, but for $3,000, most people can probably in one sales call, our plans are $3,000. If I do 4 sales calls as an hour, my close rate's pretty good. I'll close at least 1, right? So I've just generated revenue for the business. And I think this is such a hard lesson to unlearn, is when you're starting a business, you do everything. And I think the hardest thing is starting to realize that is not the highest leverage use of my time. So as a founder, when you're starting, if I could pay $3,000 to not worry about any of that back office, which is an asymmetric cost of $3,000, you can spend so much more time on the upside and focus on the gain instead of this one-time cost here where your time is way more valuable than that. So again, to be completely objective, you're right. You do not need doola to start any business, but our goal is in the future, it'd be silly not to, because there's so much value which allows you to go back to what matters, your business, let alone your family, your health, anything else in life, your hobbies, which you can now spend time on instead of doing your books every month.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Life is at the end of the day, it is about more than work, even though sometimes as founders, we forget that. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I think your point about leverage hits home for me, because there's a lot of people out there talking right now about how it's important to just get all the leverage you can, totally maximize your leverage as a founder, delegate every single thing. And to me, I think that you need to be smart about what you delegate and who you delegate it to. And those are sort of decisions that people shouldn't take lightly with their business. when you have a trusted sort of partner like you guys who's done this thousands and thousands of times for tons of companies, has probably seen it all, it's a lot easier to sort of trust that I'm delegating something to the right person and that you guys know what the right things to delegate are in the first place.
No, you're totally right. Part of it comes from, if you are, again, let's say you're selling on Shopify or Amazon, you know at some point you might need a reseller certificate or a sales tax registration. You could go to Fiverr and find someone who's maybe a little cheaper, or you could trust the company that's done that for 1,000 people. And then, yeah, you could go to Fiverr and find someone who's a CPA for strategic advisory, or our CPAs have worked with hundreds of customers, and we know other cases that can apply to you too. So it's that hive mind of knowledge and expertise which compounds. And ultimately, instead of cobbling solutions together, you can have one platform, one place, one price too.
You mentioned sort of that you guys had pivoted after getting into YC. I want to talk about that a little bit more. So you did this mid-batch, if I'm remembering correctly. Is that right? Talk to me about the thought process there. How did you realize that this idea that, these really smart people at YC had said, yes, we think this is something to fund. How did you realize that might not be the biggest opportunity in front of you and it was time to totally pivot?
One of the best things YC does is every week there's office hours with the group and you have your primary metric. Ideally, it's revenue, recurring revenue, top line revenue. And if it's not revenue, it's usage. But you have your metric. The goals grow every week. I think at least 7%. That's the initial YC goal, but it could be more. And every week, that's literally your only goal. And every week you say, what am I going to do to get to that number? And 1 week later, we tried some things that didn't work. 2 weeks later, we tried new things that doesn't work. You can only go so many weeks with that metric not moving before you have to point the finger and say, is it the idea or the execution? Like, we're trying things which we think should be working. So the nail in the coffin is several weeks of that happens. And not only are the metrics not moving up, but they're going backwards, churn, users leaving. And we were building and doing the things we thought were going to drive revenue. And the final nail in the coffin was there was this one feature, a Slack integration that every customer asked for, saying, hey, if you had the Slack integration, I'd use it. If you had the Slack integration, I'd pay for it. We built the Slack integration. They did not pay for it. They did not use it. And that was the nail in the coffin of, hey, people are just saying what you want to hear. At that point, numbers don't lie, customers don't lie. At that point, it was very clear of, hey, we could pitch a story saying that COVID is here, the future of work is remote, but that would be going through the motions and you've heard loud and clear from customers. So in that sense, it was actually very easy to say, hey, this is not it. And moving on to the next thing, which is, okay, where's the real problem?
That's the worst. When your customers are telling you, if you do this thing, I'll be an active user or I'll pay for the product or what have you, and then it doesn't happen. That's a very crushing scenario for a founder. I guess, how did you deal with that with the rest of the team? And also then, are there any learnings that you can take away from that to say to other founders, like, this is how you recognize that they're not actually as serious as they're saying?
The first thing is the user owns the problem, but you own the solution. So the problem here that customers were asking for was, well, in hindsight, the problem was the tool was a bit hard to use in terms of that's why they wanted it in Slack where they were. But the ultimate solution was not the integration. The ultimate solution was real-time communication, which was actually completely different than what we were building. So in this case here, it was the thesis or the wedge offering was off here. The second thing I would say is it's hard to avoid because you're talking to customers, but here's what I would have wished I'd done. Ultimately, the most important question in early stage is, here's how much it costs, will you pay? Like asking someone to pay and then shutting up saying nothing. Yep. I didn't do that. What I should have said to all those people is, hey, we're building the Slack feature. It costs this much. If we do not deliver it, you'll get a full refund. Here's the Stripe billing page. Shut up, don't say anything. I didn't do that. Probably because I was scared for the reaction, but that would have saved things before you even spend a cycle on dev time. If someone needs it badly enough, they'll pay before it's even there. I should have done that.
Yeah, that's a great tip. More founders should do that. It's the same as like the old landing page test where you throw up a landing page for a product that doesn't exist, put some Facebook ad spend behind it, and just see who clicks in, who drops their email, what those conversion rates are like with different messaging. It's the same kind of thing, but at sort of this critical juncture between do I build, do I not build?
Absolutely. Wish I did that.
And then going back even further, the social fitness app you were talking about, this was, I think, right after your time at Dropbox, if memory serves. What did you take from Dropbox as a first-time founder and going into this that drove you to that initial sort of idea and decision to go all in?
There were good things and bad things. I'll start with both. I think the good thing about Dropbox was I was in San Francisco. That actually, I think, was it. And my commute to work every day was down Market Street, the Uber office, the Twitter office, take a right down Second, the LinkedIn office. Then on Brandon Street was Dropbox, Pinterest, and Airbnb. every day, that's what I was seeing. And I'd be lying if I said that didn't have some impact and, hey, maybe I can do this. Those people were normal people, don't get me wrong. Hardworking, ambitious, great, like all the things which you can't take for granted they had, but that started to lead to the itch of, hey, wait a second, there's people around me, there's these new companies popping up, they're normal people at the end of the day, why can't I try to do this? So I think that was a good thing there. The other thing about Dropbox, which is great, is I thought, and I realized this isn't true, that I needed some experience at a tech company to start a tech company. It can help, but this is the bad part. I remember when in the earliest days at Dropbox, there was like a 4-step process for a shipping product, like a P0, a P1, a P2, a P3, a P4. And I was like, oh, we need that for what we're building.
Right.
No, you don't. You need a couple bullet points. Like a couple bullet points, go build the thing. Don't get me wrong, having clarity of thought's important, but breaking that mindset was important, where having a plan is good. And I think written communication is great because it forces precision versus just rambling. So I think there's a place for it too. But that was one thing to unbreak, is at that stage, you just got to put something out there. Like, don't get caught up in the work about work, put something out there. So that was one thing I had to unbreak for sure.
I went through that exact same process after, when I left Uber, I went to Airbnb and I thought I need to be a PM at Airbnb and then I'll be ready. And it turns out that almost none of what I did there is applicable to being a founder. And, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So, okay. So then that company wasn't working. Did that sort of initial failure with that discourage you from then going down the line? I mean, obviously not enough to actually stop you, but like, how did you process that as a founder? First time building a product, maybe it doesn't work the way you expect it to.
My biggest regret was not finding it out earlier. And I wish I launched earlier. I wish I asked people to pay earlier, all those things. That was the biggest regret. I think it is tough because the discouragements suck, but the more people I've met who scale businesses, regardless of the scale, there's always 10 failed things behind the scenes. It's like all you see is the tip of the iceberg. It's a prerequisite to get there. And it makes sense because that's where you learn. And there are these so many unteachable truths, but you have to learn them. You can't read them in a book. So the best analogy I've heard for this, and this is what I describe it as now, is I think entrepreneurship is like having this many-sided dice. So let's say you and I each have a dice and it has 100 sides. And there's some amount of sides on the dice that are red or green. And you have a dice, I have a dice. Let's say your dice has 50 greens, 50 reds. Mine only has 1 green. So we start rolling. Yours is showing up green 50% of the time. And the catch is every time it goes green, a red turns into a green. So you're rolling greens and more greens are coming and you're on fire. I'm rolling red. I'm rolling red. That to me is entrepreneurship, where you don't know what someone's odds are to start. And the odds are, what is their network? What's their family's background? What's their background? But as long as you keep rolling, you're actually guaranteed to have more greens come. And that to me is the failures, which turn into successes. And you look at the best entrepreneurs, they've failed so many times. They have pattern recognition. They know what can work. They know how to hire, to recruit, to scale, to found, which is why anything they touch turns to gold, because they've seen so much green. So I think that's entrepreneurship, where if you literally keep rolling and ignore the crabs, and you can't just throw stuff against the wall and hope it sticks. You have to consistently iterate. Eventually, you'll hit that green streak. It could take 5 years for some, could take 20 years for some. But that's really the way I think about it is, I didn't know this concept when I was starting, but everything in hindsight taught me something. The social fitness app, the Twitter competitor, the video thing, it all compounded into lessons for today. And I know each year I'm going to be rolling more reds and rolling more greens. And I can only imagine 10 years from now, I'll be rolling a lot more greens, as long as I'm just learning and iterating as we go.
I can totally see the connection between the last sort of 2 answers you gave in terms of mindset and what you have started and what you have built with Doola, which is helping people make that process easier, get back and do the next thing faster, form the company, get things going. I can totally see the connection there. Is that like a conscious decision, or is that just sort of where you've gravitated?
Building an audience is a full-time job, or at least it can feel like that when you're busy running your startup. But with AI making software easier to build, getting distribution is more important than ever. I can help. After growing my LinkedIn to over 40,000 followers and having 100,000 across all platforms, as well as a 60,000 subscriber newsletter, I know how impactful having an audience can be when you're building a startup these days. So I started Megaphone Studios, a ghostwriting agency specifically built for founders and their startups. Think of us like your startup's chief content officer. We turn your LinkedIn, X, or newsletter into a machine for lead generation, follower growth, and building your influence as a thought leader in your space. Our process is super lightweight for you while still delivering content that only you uniquely could write. And our plans are flexible. with no long-term lock-in because we know how fast things can change at startups. Oh, and I brought my buddy Blake Emal along to help me run the business. He has even more followers than I do. So email me at hauk@megaphone.network and mention the pod for a first month discount.
Hey, in hindsight, that sounds incredible. So we'll say that.
We'll give it to you, man. Yeah. Interesting. You also mentioned asymmetric upside. I think that's a topic that we should talk about a little bit. What sort of led you to think that way, and why is that such an important mindset for founders to have?
Comes back to leverage, but anything we do has certain input, which is usually your time, and then the potential return. And this is also a framework which has helped me understand what are the most high leverage things I can do. So there's this list I put together of things with high asymmetric upside. To also describe it, I think the opposite's helpful. You don't want to do things with asymmetric downside. Those are things like, let's say there's a building and there's another building, and I could go downstairs and take the bridge or jump over the ledge. Like jumping over the ledge, yeah, it's faster, but asymmetric downside is you fall and die, right? So tiny gain, like faster, but tons of downside. Another example is if I go to the grocery store, gum is $3. Yeah, you could steal the gum and save $3, or you go to jail. Asymmetric downside. So the opposite is things with small input, massive upside. Some examples: tweeting. You can put a tweet out there, tag anyone in the world. You can reach anyone. It could go viral. You spent the time to tweet, it goes viral. Building in public. You're increasing the surface area for getting lucky. You're talking about your business and attracting customers. Going on a first date. You could have it go embarrassingly, or you meet your future partner, right? Asymmetric upside. Going to a networking event. You can meet someone who's going to be a future investor or a colleague or a customer. Starting a business, right? There's a thing you have to start, but then the company becomes a vehicle for growth. Investing in startups, angel investing. Some of the earliest investors in Uber invested $5,000, turned into $25 million. So there's a ton of these different examples of things, again, with capped downsides or limited downsides and limitless upside. And I think that's the things that I want to work on here. And I do think starting a business is asymmetric upside. And even now I want to think of things, and this is what I love about content, what works for you when you're done working? And content is out there. It's the original software. You can put it out. This video will go out, can be repeated infinitely forever. It's working for both of us and inspiring others without us even doing a single thing.
Let's talk about content a bit. So you've obviously built a great personal brand and a great brand around Doola as well over the last couple of years. Tell me about how you use your personal brand for the business. You mentioned people follow people, not brands. That resonates with me. Makes sense to start with your own accounts. So yeah, what's the funnel there for you? And how can other founders maybe apply that?
Building in public or building the personal brand, I think it does three things. It can help you with customer acquisition, colleagues, and then capital. Like I think of it as 3 C's. So the first is customers, where you're putting yourself out there. You're just sharing the story of what you do. It could be defining what you do. It could be how you started. And naturally, for our business, it's really cool because we're talking about how we got started and, oh, wait, I actually need to start a business. So let me come to Doola. And I've seen this time and time again. Someone saying, I've been following you for years. I knew the moment I wanted to start, it was going to be Doola. Or I could post something non-relevant to the company, but someone notices the company and they're like, hey, I want to start a business. So I think there's absolutely a customer acquisition channel. The second is colleagues. And if you just zoom out and think for yourself, let's say you were applying to work at a company. Would you rather want to work at a company which you know about or don't know about? Likely one you know about. And if you're building in public, people can learn about the company before they've even got there. A sense of who you are, the company too. So you're kind of building this advertisement over time of what the company is and what you're doing so that someone can consume that content. And before they've even met, they've kind of sold themselves on the business. Or they've deselected themselves, which is good too, right? Because you're building a culture. And if people don't find it interesting, that's good for everyone. The third is capital, where whether you're raising capital or not, investors and others can find you on these social platforms and you're staying top of mind too. So there's been several investors through Twitter DMs where we've been able to chat back and forth and close. Other investors who I'll do a catch-up call and they'll say, by the way, I've been following you on LinkedIn for the past year. And I was like, whoa, I didn't think about you until last week. You've been following for the last year too. So I think it's more than just, hey, I'm getting my follower count increasing. Overall, though, I think there's these 3 distinct funnels and there's a ton of upside that can come from repeatedly putting yourself out there. And the last thing I'll say, this motivated me to be really consistent here is on any social network, there's the rule of 99 and 1 or 99 and 1. 90% of people on any platform consume content. They're the consumers. They don't do anything but consume. 9% curate, which means they might engage or like or respond. Only 1% creates. The bar is low. Literally, the bar is low to be in the 1%. All you have to do is post and no one else is doing it. Our competitors aren't doing it. And the best part is, even if it didn't work for any customer acquisition or colleagues or capital, I think it's cool because you get this digital memory book where 50 years from now, you can look back and you have a timestamp for the journey too. So that's the selfish reason, but I think there's so many more other reasons that can help there too.
So I know you're a pretty systems-driven guy. I would imagine that you have a system built behind this process that you yourself sort of plug into. You're writing the content, you're scheduling it. What is that system? I think a lot of founders kind of get overwhelmed with the idea of, I got to build my business and build a personal brand for myself, founder brand. How do you manage both?
It's changed over time. When I was first starting, my system was on the weekends, because there was less distractions, more time. I would pull up a tool and I would just blast music for a few hours and I would draft posts. So that's batching. That's the technical term, but I would batch, creative juices flowing, no other meetings, and I would just batch and have the post ready for the upcoming week, sometimes even for 2 weeks. That made it easier because then during the week, I didn't have to think, the post was ready to go. So that was one thing to start. I think batching helps a ton because it is tougher if every day you wake up and you're like, oh no, what am I going to post? And then there's an email that came up or a fire, so let me not do it. The thing I do a bit more of now is I can, and I do think there's like times when I'll just fire from the hip where there's something that comes to mind and I'll quickly go post it. But I do think that ounce of pre-work is worth a pound of the post-work, ounce of preparation, pound of cure. And in anything now, I really try to think, how can I make it so obvious and easy to do that it's almost impossible not to do? So like for content, for example, having posts batched and keyed up, they're going to go out. That's awesome. Another example I like is it's so easy to go to the gym first thing in the morning when my clothes are sitting right there and my bag is packed. Or the more extreme example is go to sleep in your exercise clothes. Then you wake up and you feel kind of silly for not going there too. So I think make it obvious, make it easy, and start simple. For me, when we started, my entire content strategy was write a post for Twitter, copy paste the same post and put it on LinkedIn. Now, long form YouTube videos, we have a podcast, we're doing shorts, we're doing threads, we're doing a little of everything now, but it doesn't have to start that way and it doesn't start that way for most. So I would just recommend keep it so simple, start with one platform. If you want extra credit, you can repurpose onto LinkedIn or another platform and just stay consistent. If you stay consistent, you will start to see a feedback loop or the results. And even one person just saying, hey, I found that post valuable, that can be enough to fuel you on for the next few months.
I think we've seen a lot of changes in the last year or so, especially with the Twitter algorithm, but also just with newsfeed algorithms across platforms in general. Less so about your followers seeing your content, more so about the algorithm serving up the right content, quote unquote, to you at any given time. How are you thinking about that? And sort of what platform or platforms are you most excited about right now?
YouTube.
Me too.
Reason being, and it does depend on the business, but for our business, it takes a lot of trust to decide, should I start a business? Let me put it this way. Like hashtag TikTok made me buy it. You don't impulse start an LLC or impulse start bookkeeping or do taxes. You don't. You like, do I trust a CPA? If I start a business, there's taxes. Like you don't impulse just scroll and do it. Don't get me wrong. There can be a time when you get fired up and say, I'm starting this business and open up 6 browsers and decide who to go use. But the reason why I'm so bullish on YouTube is you are effectively looking at someone in the eyes for 5 to 10 minutes and building trust. Yeah, you're building trust at scale. And the other thing I love about YouTube is there's SEO juice. In other platforms, it's very ephemeral. It disappears on the feed or on the timeline, but on YouTube, it's there forever. So you can get a long-term compounding effect from SEO. You're building trust over time, and picture's worth 1,000 words, a video's worth 1,000 pictures. It's the most dynamic form of communication outside of in-person. So really bullish on YouTube for our business, but I think for any business, another regret. I wish when we started Doola, even before starting Doola, I was just posting 2 videos per week, just documenting the journey. Not even being being an influencer. I don't like that term because I think this is another thing for founders. Like, I don't have time to be an influencer. I don't view myself as an influencer. I'm a documenter. Literally, I'm just documenting things I've learned and things on the journey. And that is the way I've kind of reframed it in my mind.
One more question on this. What are your thoughts on sort of these social platforms where you are at the whim of the algorithm and it's sort of this rented audience that you have versus something like a newsletter, especially for a startup that's looking to invest capital behind this on like a long-term basis and building more of an owned audience? How do you think about that?
I think ultimately your job is to own the customer. Like ultimately a business is valued based on the value of their list or their user base. And you're at the whim of the platform. So ultimately, how do you get that email or get the customer using your platform? I think that's ultimately the goal with any platform. That being said, I think there's a there's levels to it, right? So step 1 is maybe they follow you on the platform. And then step 2 is they maybe check out your website, and it's not give me your email, it's I'm giving you value. Here's the e-commerce empire guide to starting your business, which has an Excel sheet, it has a profit margin calculator, it has a free CPA consultation. And in exchange for that, you provided enough value. We're like, yeah, I want to give you my email so I can get more value from you in the future too. So I would agree, ultimately the goal is to capture the email, but the way you do that is by providing value. And that could start with value just in terms of content where they're following you. And I also think the thing I have to overcome here is just because you are at the whim of the platform or the audience or the algo doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Because hey, if you there's an opportunity there, but it's really about building the funnel of cool. Like here's where we're posting, and then is there a way I can capture that value or capture the email over time?
One thing I think is an interesting challenge that you guys have solved, and that I've seen pop up in other businesses, and they haven't really solved it as elegantly as you guys have, is, the initial product that Doola was offering was just incorporation, right? You guys were like, we're going to help you incorporate your business. We're going to make it really easy to do that. That is inherently a one-time thing for most businesses, right? It's 100% churn after that. In fact, you to solve that by obviously adding on more long-term services that make a lot of sense. But I guess, how did you know how to turn that challenge into sort of a more long-term opportunity?
Any problem can be solved by talking to customers, anything. And this one was a bit easier because when we were trying to tell customers how to form their business, they weren't asking questions about forming their business. They were asking questions about taxes. And we were like, wait, why? Everyone's asking about taxes before they even care about what state to form in. Okay, taxes are important. Let's add taxes. Then the next thing was when we were doing tax filings, a lot of people said, my books are a mess, or I haven't done my bookkeeping. And there's this whole other part of the life journey of, hey, you form, that's a one-time offering, taxes is one time, what happens in between? So bookkeeping made a lot of sense to add too, where you can actually have the books ready to go so that you can file taxes automatically. So ultimately, I do think that, and I think this is where it's easy to get caught up with, you can have and build a business off a service, even a one-time offering. Once you deliver that value, there's guaranteed to be more problems you can solve for customers. And those problems could be recurring solutions or just more valuable offerings, right? You're moving up the value ladder, where there's a world where Doola forms the companies, and the next thing we do is we help people spin up a podcast. I don't know, maybe we do that in the future, where every founder wants to build a personal brand, and Doola has a done for you 10K service where we'll fly to your office and set up a camera and set up a podcast. Who knows? We'll learn if that's a problem by talking to customers. I've learned the hard way. We'll sell it before we have the offering to see if someone actually has the need or pain point there. But ultimately, I do think that once you've delivered one solution, just talk to customers. They have more pain points and they have your trust already. It's easier to sell an existing customer versus a new one.
Yeah, interesting. I've seen a lot of businesses get stuck, and again, it does come back to just talking to customers, but they just don't realize that they think they just need to sell to more people and just grow revenue that way. But it's a losing battle if they try to do that.
One thing I started doing, and I wish I did this when we started, is any person who starts a company with Doola, they get an email from me, directly from me. And I read every single email and I personally respond to every email. It asks, thank you for using Doola. How did you hear about us? If you have any other feedback, let us know. I've learned so much from those conversations. People say, I heard about you in this group, or, hey, I have a question about this. So you understand right away what isn't being solved in terms of problems and where you're finding customers from, so you can do more. So many things of like, you're never too big to stop talking to customers. And even in person, it's tough in this environment with COVID happening and the world being remote, but I'm even more bullish now on doing events in New York to actually meet someone in person so you can learn a ton from them as well.
Another thing that I think you guys have done well is, as you've sort of built up this business in a box, right? You've sort of known what parts to fully invest in building in-house versus what parts to augment with external tech or whatever the case may be. How do you make that decision and that trade-off? Because obviously there's benefits and also cons to both paths.
We have made so many mistakes. I'll give you an example. Did you know Doola used to have a website builder? We launched and built a white labeled website builder, so you could start your business and build a website. It didn't work. And the reason why is, yes, people need a website, but is your solution truly as good as GoDaddy or Squarespace or Wix from a product perspective and an education perspective and positioning everything? Absolutely not. So just because you have it doesn't mean someone's going to use it. And that's another example of learning the hard way of, hey, it's better to focus on one thing or one area, which we call the compliance or the back office, and do it spectacularly, versus just throwing things in. So yeah, I'd be lying if I said, hey, we nailed the perfect execution in terms of only doing things which, call it build versus partner or build versus buy. But in this case here, I think in hindsight, the sequencing matters because as a startup, time's your most valuable asset. So that's another thing we learned the hard way. I think going forward now, way more intentional about why do we think not only is this thing worth adding, but is it accretive? Meaning does adding this thing make our other offerings better, or does having it mean multiple offerings get stronger? So one example here, our tax offering gets more powerful with bookkeeping because the books are automatically prepared for taxes, and our analytics solution is more powerful because we have your books. We can do analysis that no one else can do. So right away there, things are accretive, and our tax offering is more powerful because we have your formation data. So we can pre-fill tax filings too. So all of these things are accretive versus just in isolation. That's something which I think a lot about now in terms of the future roadmap as well.
I think one of the other lessons there too is just like iteration, speed of iteration, shots on goal, right? Like you're not going to get it right necessarily the first time. You're going to build the website builder, right? It's going to happen. And you're going to then later hate that you spent the time on that. But at the same time, you've learned something. And if you move fast enough, the downside of the pain isn't actually that bad.
Shots on goal. The Tom Brady's lost more Super Bowls than anyone else in the world. Michael Jordan's missed more game-winning shots than anyone in history. So the greats have failed more than most people have tried, which is why there's many times now, or there's so few times now where I can complain because you just haven't even tried enough to be worthy of complaining.
That's a good way to think about it. Okay, let's talk about actually incorporation for a bit too. The meat and potatoes here, right? So if I'm a founder who's in the US, or maybe even a founder who's based outside the US who wants to set up a US entity, what state should I pick? What are sort of the pitfalls that I should avoid that maybe aren't obvious to me?
A lawyer will tell you 11 things you shouldn't do. I'll tell you the one thing you should do. That's one thing which I didn't like before, so let me give you the answer. Two simple decision trees. If you are raising US venture capital, form a Delaware C Corp. Simply put, because through a C Corp, it's easier to offer shares. Investors will typically require a C Corp too, due to the dual tax structure, which means they don't have to pay taxes over time. And ultimately, because of the Chancery Court in Delaware, the case law is studied there. So Y Combinator, for example, require a Delaware C Corp. Very simple. If venture capital, raise a C Corp. Start a C Corp, raise venture. If not, do an LLC. Like it actually is usually that simple. There might be some edge cases where a C Corp might be better depending on your country, but an LLC is easier to maintain. It's more flexible. It has tax flexibility too. You get the liability protection. You get the social proof. That's the simple decision tree I would draw there. Now, let's say you live in the US or outside the US. In either case, if you're raising venture from US investors, you'll want the Delaware C Corp. When it comes to the LLC, if you live in the US, the best state to form in is the state you live in. This is a big mistake people make because they hear Delaware and they think, oh, I should form in Delaware. But let's say you live in New York and you form a Delaware LLC. Turns out by living in New York, you actually are doing business in New York. The definition is you're physically based there. Even sending emails counts as doing business. So you technically have to do what's called a foreign qualification to register to do business in New York. So you've doubled your fees. You now need to pay for a registry agent in Delaware and New York and the annual fees. So you should have just formed in New York to start out with until you start hiring employees in other states. So in the US, you should form in the state you live in. If you live outside the US, the world's your oyster. You can choose any state in the US. Now, I want to give an actual answer. We typically recommend Wyoming. And the reason for that is Wyoming is actually cheaper than Delaware. The annual fee is $60 versus $300. Wyoming's very friendly in terms of e-commerce businesses, crypto businesses. They're very forward-looking too. And don't sleep on Wyoming too. The LLC was invented there. So for a combination of reasons, most international founders actually do Wyoming. But ultimately, it's your business. Your business is your baby. You can choose Delaware if you'd like as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard about Wyoming for crypto. I didn't realize it was also just cheaper in general for that annual fee. That makes a lot of sense. I guess like even a step before that, like, you probably see a lot of data on this. What percentage of people who want to go start a company and actually maybe even have an idea or a problem that they validated, do people stop at the stage of like forming the company? And if so, like what are the main pain points that pop up there for them?
We've seen these stats. We've looked at LegalZoom's public filings. LegalZoom is one of the largest formation companies in the US. And for someone starting a business, typically 30 to 40% of those businesses will churn in the first year. Now, that to me is the rate of someone who's actually formed and the business died. In most cases, actually, that business doesn't die because LegalZoom or doola did a bad job. It's because the business organically died. That could mean the hypothesis was off in terms of what they're building, or the team loses motivation. I actually think that most businesses don't die when they run out of money. They die when the team or the founder loses motivation. That's the first death toll. So 30 to 40% of someone who starts. Now, I don't have the stat on how many people have an idea and actually see it through. And here's the other thing, even technically this goes against using doula, but you don't need to start a company to start a business. You can get out there and start a website. You can charge someone, and the second you charge someone, you should quickly set up a business bank account. But it's okay to get your first transaction through Venmo or cash. Seriously, that's not the bottleneck to you starting. So ultimately, 30 to 40% organically die starting a business is very hard.
Okay, so then people go through the formation process with you guys. You sort of help them through that, and you see the businesses that maybe are failing, the ones that are not. What are some of those other? I mean, you mentioned bookkeeping, you mentioned a few other things as well, analytics that you guys are helping with. How do those services help those businesses that maybe otherwise would fall into that bucket of failing and the founders maybe getting demotivated? How does that keep them afloat? How is that important for them?
Let's start going backwards. There are two certainties in life: death and taxes. So we're not solving death. You can follow Brian Johnson for that. But taxes, you are going to have to pay taxes no matter where you live. And your business can be killed if you don't pay taxes, or there's fines. So you're going to have to do it. Your time is valuable. Again, if you can pay someone who's done it for thousands of customers in e-commerce who knows you well, outsource it. So that's the first thing on taxes. It's required for any business. There's state taxes, there's business taxes, there's personal taxes. Find someone who can do it for all of these things. Like, I actually think it's worth outsourcing for these things. Unless you're a CPA or it's your zone of genius, then sure, go for it. But if it's not, you should outsource it. Then bookkeeping. First, candidly, I didn't know what bookkeeping or accounting was. People use them interchangeably. And you might think, like, why do I actually need this? At the end of the day, you can only manage what you can measure. And when you're starting a business, there's nothing. But once you start getting customers, I actually think a business starts not when you form the LLC or the website, but when you get revenue. That is when a business actually starts. So once you have revenue, though, if you have a business where you spend $10 to acquire a customer and they pay you $1, you don't have a business. You have, I'm losing $9. But you don't know that unless you have bookkeeping. So that, there you go. You have a hole, and there's going to be churn. But this is where bookkeeping is actually just knowing how much revenue is coming in, what are your costs, how much is going out, am I profitable, and ultimately, bookkeeping prepares your books to file taxes. So it's preparation for tax filing. So you need them to actually do your taxes. So with that in mind, again, it comes down to there will come a time when you're starting. Yes, you don't need to have bookkeeping set up, but what I would say is plug in a free bookkeeping solution so that things just start getting tagged. There are free solutions. There's software that you can pay $30 a month for. You can just go completely free. I was going to say use a spreadsheet, but you really shouldn't in this day and age. You can find free software, but use a spreadsheet versus doing nothing. And that ultimately is what bookkeeping provides. It gives visibility into your business, your metrics, so that you can not only file your taxes, but so that you know where you can double down. Where should I pour more fuel on the fire? Where should I cut things back? What product lines are working? Are there certain parts of my organization which are more efficient? All of these types of questions you can only understand from knowing the numbers.
Yeah, I definitely see that with my own business. Like, if you can track your spend in different categories, you can see revenue growth for different parts of the business or different cohorts or things like that. It makes a ton of sense. I think the kind of dual analytics on top of the books also can be really helpful. Cool. Well, look, man, I think this has been great. Got a ton of great stuff, and I want to do the rapid fire outro with you if you're up for that.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So number one, name an investor who other founders should take capital from and why.
I'm a bit biased, but Ankur Nagpal, he was one of our earliest investors. He started Teachable, and now he owns a company called Ocho. You always want those earliest believers, and he's great because he's been a founder and he's been an investor, and now he's being a founder, so he can speak from both sides too. So if you can get Ankur on your cap table, do it. He's awesome.
What is one thing you would change about the startup world?
This goes against the startup world, but I kid you not, I didn't know what bootstrapping was when I lived in San Francisco. I actually thought the only way you could start a business is you raise money, you go on TechCrunch, you Hacker News. So I would change that about the startup world. Like, hey, understanding what it means to be venture-backed and what path you're going down, and that there's other routes to building different types of businesses. And I think that conversation in education doesn't really happen because each industry is biased to not have that and to get more people going into your industry. So teaching people, because I didn't know what it was. What is bootstrapping? I didn't know what an LLC was. I just knew what a Delaware C Corp was. Teaching people these things, because ultimately you can build a very meaningful life in business doing any of those things.
I totally agree. I was in the same boat early on. Okay, you already gave your number one piece of advice for first-time founders. How about your number two piece of advice?
Taking action for first-time founders, because it's so easy to get stuck. And I said all these things, so they all are intertwined, where you'll have the naysayers, but some of the smartest people I know, they're not good business owners. because they haven't taken action. Like if it was truly a battle of who knew the most, every PhD would be a trillionaire. It would just be, there's a direct correlation between these people know the most, but no, and I've seen this so much now. The people, there's no age for this too. Like I've met 20-year-olds running 6-7-figure businesses on Shopify with a completely undifferentiated product, but they took action. And you can't complain and say, oh, but your product's not differentiated, or, you're just doing viral TikTok shots, you're getting lucky. No, they're taking action. That's what they're doing. And like the harder you work, the luckier you get. You're increasing your surface area for getting lucky. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So that really taking action produces information, and fortune favors the bold. I'll say it again because it resonates. A bold dumbass will beat a shy genius. You can be as smart as you want, but you got to take action.
Love it. And last one, what's something that you believe that most people disagree with you on?
This might be a bit of a hot take, but I'll say it. I think that balance is for people who haven't yet found their purpose. Now, let me double click there. That does not mean that you should be balanced in many things. I think that it's all or nothing can be damaging. Like certain diets, if you're truly all or nothing, the second you fall off the diet, you binge, right? Which isn't good. Like there actually should be some balance. But one thing I've just realized is that I'll use 2 examples. Michael Phelps, when he was winning 8 golds in Beijing, before that Olympics, he trained for 7 years, 7 days a week. And his math was, if I train on the weekends, 2 weekends per week times 52, that's 104, times 7 is 728 extra days of training. I'm just putting in more work. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, another example, 6-time Mr. Olympia, he trained for 5 hours a day for 15 years. More volume, more work. And when people see that, they say, so inspiring, so committed to their craft, what dedication. But the second someone who works says, oh, I'm going to work a little late or work on the weekend, workaholic. You're obsessed. That's not healthy. So the thing here I'd say is, there's this prejudice against being obsessed with something and putting in the work, depending on what it is. But that's where I think you don't need to have balance in something if you find joy in it and you see value from it. And that's where I think when I say you don't have a purpose, it doesn't mean your life is meaningless. That's not what I'm saying. It also doesn't mean you have to go start a business to do something of value. Absolutely not. But I've just realized that people who are obsessed, they found that purpose. So they found that thing which I'm fully committed to, and balance isn't good for that. You need full obsession. You want to wake up thinking about the thing, go to sleep thinking about the thing. And I think it's a blessing to have that. I'd say single-digit percentage, maybe even less, of people find that thing. If you have it, lucky you. Seriously, I think most people don't get the chance or the blessing to have to do it. You don't have to, you get to do that. So I'll finish with that. Again, it's not to put down anyone else not doing a startup, but I think it's a blessing in whatever, whether it's a sport or a business or a hobby, to find that thing which you don't want to have balance in, you want to go all in on.
I couldn't agree more, man. I love it. Cool. Well, Arjun, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you? Where can they find Doola?
Doola.com. Schedule a free consultation, get a demo, whether you're starting or scaling your e-commerce business. And you can find me on social, just Arjun Mahadevan. Would love to be a part of your journey or follow along, and ignore the craps. Take action. Seriously, anyone can do it. You just got to keep rolling the dice.
Got to ignore those crabs, man. Cool. Well,
find your chimps. Ignore the crabs. Find the chimps.
I love it. Cool. You're better.
Thanks for listening. I write up my main takeaways from every conversation and make them available to all of our members at foundingjourney.com, along with a bunch of other perks and more content. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Founding Journey on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. I post a new episode every Thursday. Also, consider leaving us a rating or a review. As a brand new podcast, this is the best way for us to get out there and founders to find us. See you next time.